Welcome to this short tutorial on landscape photography. So you can see this picture in front of you now. This was the picture that I was setting the camera up to photograph just about a week ago out in a nice area in Espoo called Tarvespa. And I'm just going to go through the whole setup of the tripod and setting the camera up on it, the position of the tripod and so on, and using the graduated filters to photograph the scene. You can see I was photographing mostly into the sun, so that's why the graduated filters in this case were also quite important. So let's get started. So here you can see I have the tripod set up with the head pointing out towards the sea. So if we just step back from it and we look at this is the scene then that I was photographing or going to photograph, the one that you saw just at the beginning of the video. So this was how the tripod was set up, pointing out towards the sea and the other islands. So I'll just go through how the tripod is set up and mounting the camera on the tripod. Here's the top of the tripod, because this is a separate head and this is the clip here. So this clip is used to hold the plate in place, which is currently attached to my camera, which you see now. So that's screwed on to the base of the camera, and we see the lens direction there, so you know what way it should be facing, and it goes on top of the camera, and then you'll see now it'll just clip into place. So it just slots on, and then it just press it down and you'll see the clip on the left just clipping in place. And it's clipped. I mean, you notice straight away that my horizon is totally crooked, so I'm going to need to straighten that out, and that's what these three knobs on the tripod are. So those three knobs control the three different directions. So one knob will rotate the camera around if you want to change the composition a little bit. You'll notice this spirit level here. So this is telling me that at the moment I'm crooked. So this knob here rotates it around. This one will corrects the verticals and horizontals, so you can see now it's much straighter. And then the third knob, which I'll adjust shortly, will correct whether the camera is leaning too forward or too much back. So at the moment it's too forward, so I'm going to rotate it a little back, and you'll see how it gets corrected on the spirit level. The guide on the back of the camera is quite useful to use, but also it's useful to have this spirit level as well to make sure that the tripod itself is straight. But if you have one of these guides on your camera as well, you can certainly use that. So now it's set up nicely and I can go ahead and start photographing. So just looking at this scene here in front of us, you can clearly see that how bright it is just from this recording that I'm making through video. So the sky is well overexposed in comparison to the landscape. So the neutral density filter will help to shade out the sky, make it darker and give us a more balanced exposure to the overall image itself once I apply them to the front of the camera. So you can see how essential they can be in landscape photography. Here you can see the ND filter as I hold it in front of the camera, and you can see it's darkening the sky down nicely, so it'll have a good effect when I apply it onto the front of the camera, and we'll get a balanced sky because the sun is here, it's just behind these clouds. So let's get started. So here you can see these are the two attachments for the neutral density filter to go on. The first one screws on to the thread here on the lens, so the lens will have a standard thread on it. It's 52mm is the size of this particular lens. Different lenses will have different thread sizes. So I'm just screwing it on here. With some difficulty it doesn't go on easy, but just remember that you don't scratch the lens, or I have a UV filter on the lens here, that it's important not to scratch it when you're putting it on. It's quite fumbly here because also it was a cold day, so fingers don't work as well. But once it screws on, then get it nice and tight, not too tight, just gently tighten it, and then this clips on to that on the front. So that's one size fits all in terms of filters. So you just put that down on top and just push it down until you hear the clip. So just make sure it's on correctly, and you can hear it clipping there. So it's in place now and ready for the filters to go on. Just make sure it's straight. A neutral density filter then, which I have in my hand here. It goes on just in the slide that's closest to the lens, and as you can see, it moves nicely down. Important just to keep it straight. And if you want, you can add further neutral density filters to the other 2 slots that are available there, so you can have up to 3 in front of the lens at any one time. It's also a good idea to keep these clean. At the moment this has some dust on it. Normally I always carry around this blower with me. It's called Rocket Air, and it's really useful for removing dust from the filters. And that should be done for both sides. It's better to get it this way before putting it into Photoshop to save on work later. And if I want to, then I can add a second one of these filters to get a little more darkness into the sky, and that goes in here into the first slot. And we can have a look at that result now. Always make sure then that your camera is securely on the tripod. You can see here this one works with a clip-on, clip-off system. So once the clip is on and in this position, it won't fall off, because the danger is that the tripod or the camera can fall off the tripod and it will fall towards the ground with the lens first. Also, it's important when you're using the tripod, you'll notice the way I have it set up here. The front leg pointing forward and the 2 legs at the back. This makes it much easier to stand in behind the camera because there's no leg protruding getting in your way. So it's always recommended to have the front leg pointing forward in the same direction as the lens. So here we have just some of the settings that were used for taking the photograph. So you can see in the back of the camera the shutter speed and the ISO, and here on the lens you can see the aperture was set to f11. This is a manual lens, so you can see there the yellow line, and then you can see here it telling you where infinity is set to, so it's around f8 or just after f11. And then on the other side it's at around 0.8 or 2.5 meters, so that's the focus goes from 2.5 to infinity. On the back of the camera then you can just see where I have the, as I mentioned, the ISO, which is 250, and the shutter speed. So just taking a picture. And here you have the image that I've just taken with ISO 250, and the aperture doesn't show up because the lens is manual, it doesn't talk to the camera, and then the shutter speed is 190th of a second. Let's just summarize then what we've learned in this short video. So we looked at the setup of the camera and the tripod. Remember that it's important the way the tripod is physically set up, that the leg should be pointing in one of the legs should be pointing in the same direction as a lens. This also serves to support longer lenses if you're using a telephoto or a zoom lens, but it's also good practice, as I mentioned, that there shouldn't be any leg in the way when you're standing at the back of the camera. The type of lens I also used for this shoot was a 24mm lens. So we can look at the images now. So the first image you see now here in front of you was the first one shot without any filters. The sky is quite overcast, as you can see, or overshot. The exposure is much too high on that. Much of the highlights are burnt out in the sky. And then if we fade that in and we have a look at the second image was with one filter applied. So one of the filters across the image, and you can see you start to get better detail in the sky, with still some colors are still a little bit bleached or a little bit pastel-y. With the third filter then the second filter, it darkens the sky and it helps bring more colors into play as well within the sky itself. And you get a nice kind of effect of those kind of darker clouds that were there when the photo shoot was being made, because it was quite partially cloudy day. There had been some showers and so on. So it helps preserve those details within the sky. It's also good to remember that while ND filters are very useful when you're photographing, because they can also preserve things like cutting down on reflections and so on, you can do these types of shoots using an approach called high dynamic range photography, or HDR. So that will involve capturing several images at different exposures. So to expose for the sky, get a balanced exposure on the sky, and then eventually getting a balanced exposure then on the landscape through, maybe it can depend on the dynamic range in the shot. So that might be only take 3 photographs, it might take 5, it might require 7 or 9, and then combining them afterwards in some software. A lot of newer cameras can do all this in camera, so you don't necessarily need to have to take these shots. But this is also referred to as bracketing in the cameras if you are taking the multiple shots. But you may have a HDI mode in your camera that allows you to photograph this, and then the camera does it all together for you. So I hope this was useful and that you got something out of this tutorial on setting up the camera and using the ND filters in the landscape. Thanks for watching.